The wind cut like a knife across the reservation border that night. John Running Bear pulled his worn jacket tighter, his steps heavy with another day's burden. That's when he saw her, a small bundle curled against the dumpster, shivering, a white child, no more than 5, clutching a crumpled paper. The words scrawled in pencil knocked the air from his lungs. "I'm hungry." In 20 years since returning from Vietnam, John had trained himself to walk away from trouble. The reservation had enough of its own, but something in her eyes, trust where there should be none, made his calloused hands reach down. Could one broken man protect a child when both their worlds were determined to pull them apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. John stood motionless, the child's note clutched in his weathered hand. The girl remained curled against the dumpster, her eyes following his every movement. The reservation line was just a quarter-mile behind him. Ahead lay the border town where Indians were still served last at the diner. "You got folks nearby?" John's voice came out rougher than intended. The girl pulled her knees tighter to her chest. Her coat was too thin for October in Montana. No hat, no gloves. John scanned the empty lot. No car, no footprints besides his own and the small ones leading to the dumpster. "Someone leave you here." A slight nod the wind picked up, sending paper wrappers skittering across the gravel. John's truck sat 50 yards away, its rusted frame barely visible in the fading light. He'd stopped only to dump trash from a job site. Carpentry work was scarce, but white folks in town trusted him for repairs. The quiet Indian, they called him. 20 years since Vietnam, and he'd mastered invisibility. "I should call the sheriff," he muttered. The girl's eyes widened with fear. John knew that look. He'd seen it on the faces of village children in Vietnam. He'd worn it himself at the boarding school where they'd cut his hair and washed his mouth with soap for speaking Apache. The logical thing was to drive to the sheriff's office. Drop her off. Not his problem. The reservation had troubles enough. The drinking, the poverty, the despair that clung like smoke to the clapboard houses. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The temperature was dropping fast. "Can you stand?" John asked. The girl uncurled slowly, revealing a small frame swimming in dirty clothes. 5, maybe 6 years old. She wobbled as she stood. "You got a name?" She stared at her shoes. "I'm John." He didn't offer his last name. Running Bear felt too much like a caricature when speaking to white folks. He gestured toward his truck. "I got a place. It's warm. Got team soup." The girl clutched her small backpack tighter, uncertainty in her stance. "Or I can take you to town, to the police." She shook her head violently. John sighed. He knew the system. Foster homes. Questions. For a native man bringing in a white child, there would be suspicion. "Plenty of it. Look, just for tonight. Tomorrow we figure something out." She took a tentative step toward him. The drive to his cabin took 12 minutes. The girl pressed against the passenger door, her breath fogging the window. John's home sat at the edge of the reservation, not quite belonging to either world. Like him, inside he lit the wood stove. The one-room cabin was clean but sparse. A bed in the corner, table with 2 chairs, kitchenette with a hot plate. On the wall hung a single photograph, his mother in traditional dress, taken before the drinking took her. "Hungry?" John asked, opening a can of beef stew. The girl nodded, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. As the stew heated, Thomas Blackhawk's truck rumbled outside. The old man had been tribal police before retirement. Nothing happened on the reservation without Thomas knowing. "Got company, Running Bear," Thomas called through the door. John stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. "Found her by the dump. Had a note saying she's hungry." Thomas's face hardened. "White child? Are you crazy? Just for tonight. You call the county. Tomorrow." Thomas removed his hat, running fingers through gray-streaked hair. You bringing trouble home, brother. What was I supposed to do? Same thing we always do. Stay out of white folks' business. Inside, the girl had found a spoon and was watching the pot of stew with hungry eyes. She was alone, Thomas. Left like trash. Thomas studied him. War still haunting you? This some kind of redemption? John didn't answer. Maybe it was. Maybe every child he didn't help in Vietnam had led to this moment. Council won't like it, Thomas warned. Just one night. Thomas nodded slowly. I'll come by tomorrow. We'll figure it out. He turned to leave, then paused. She say anything about who left her? Not a word. After Thomas left, John filled a bowl with stew. The girl ate silently, her eyes never leaving him. When she finished, he gave her his only spare t-shirt to sleep in and made a pallet on the floor for himself. You take the bed, he said. As she curled under the blanket, her small voice finally broke the silence. Sarah, she whispered. My name is Sarah. John nodded. Sleep now, Sarah. Tomorrow will come soon enough. He lay awake long after her breathing steadied, wondering what he'd gotten himself into, and why, for the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt just a little lighter. The wood stove crackled, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. John sat in his chair, watching Sarah sleep. Her small chest rose and fell beneath the worn blanket. Outside, the wind howled through pine trees, carrying the first hint of snow. He reached into his pocket, fingers finding the smooth contours of the arrowhead he'd carried since childhood. His grandfather had watched him dig it from the earth when he was 8. Our ancestors speak through such things, the old man had said. They remind us who we are when the world tries to make us forget. Tonight, John needed remembering, needed grounding in something certain. Sarah whimpered in her sleep, her face contorting. Whatever haunted her had followed into dreams. Without thinking, John moved to the bedside, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently resting on her shoulder. Shoo, he whispered. You're safe now. The girl's eyes flew open, wild with fear. It's just me, John said, backing away slightly. Just John. Recognition slowly replaced panic. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter. Bad dream? John asked. She nodded. I get those too. He returned to his chair. Want some water? Another nod. John filled a cup from the kitchen tap. The pipes groaned. Reservation plumbing was temperamental at best. He handed her the cup, careful not to make sudden movements. Where's my mom? Her voice was small but clear. John settled back into his chair. I don't know. Was she the one who left you? Sarah stared into her water cup. She said wait. Said she'd come back. How long were you waiting? 2 days. She held up 2 fingers to emphasize. John's jaw tightened. 2 days alone by a dumpster. What's your mom's name? Mommy. As if that explained everything. Your last name. Where do you live? Sarah's eyes welled with tears. I'm not supposed to tell, she said. Don't tell. Her breathing quickened. Are you going to hurt me? The question hit John like a physical blow. No, never. The men who came to our house hurt Mom, she screamed. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. I hid under the bed. John recognized the fragments of a story too common. Drugs, violence, a child caught in the aftermath. He'd seen it on the reservation enough times. No one's going to hurt you here, he said firmly. Sarah seemed to study him, deciding whether to believe. Finally, she lay back down, eyes still watchful. John moved to the kitchenette, taking down the coffee can where he kept emergency cash. $43, not much, but enough for some necessities. Tomorrow we'll get you some clean clothes, he said. Some real food. Then I go home. Hope and fear mingled in her question. John hesitated. We'll figure things out tomorrow. Try to find your mom. Sarah's hand emerged from beneath the blanket, clutching a ragged stuffed rabbit, missing one ear. She'd kept it hidden until now. Bob says we should stay here. John's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Bob seems smart. He's brave, Sarah corrected, hugging the rabbit closer. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the cabin interior. Sarah tensed until the light faded. Those men won't find me here, she asked. No one's going to find you unless I want them to, John promised, surprising himself with the protective edge in his voice. He watched as Sarah's eyelids grew heavy again, the arrowhead in his pocket pressed against his thigh, a small, hard reminder of promises and survival. Morning came with pale light filtering through thin curtains. John woke stiff from sleeping in the chair. The bed was empty, blankets thrown aside. For a moment, panic seized him. Had she wandered outside? Run away? Then he spotted her, tiny figure crouched by the wood stove, adding a small stick to the dying embers, just as she'd watched him do the night before. You need to be careful with fire, John said softly. Sarah jumped slightly. It was getting cold. The simple practicality of her response struck him. A child who thought to tend a fire had learned early to care for herself. John stood, stretching his back. Hungry? Sarah nodded vigorously. He took out the last eggs from his small refrigerator. As he cracked them into a pan, Sarah watched intently from a careful distance. Where did you learn to be so quiet? John asked. Mum says quiet keeps you safe. The simple furf of her words settled heavily between them. John slid the eggs onto 2 plates, adding the last piece of bread to hers. They ate in silence, 2 strangers sharing a meal, connected by nothing but a chance encounter and the unspoken understanding of what it meant to survive. By noon, everyone knew. News traveled across the reservation like wind through prairie grass. John Running Bear had brought home a white child. Thomas Blackhawk's truck pulled up outside the cabin as John was heating soup. 3 more vehicles followed, council members who couldn't wait for official meetings. Stay inside, John told Sarah, who nodded solemnly, retreating to a corner with her rabbit. Outside, Thomas stood with Elaine Whitecloud, the council chairwoman, and Robert Tallbear, who'd served as tribal police for 30 years. Behind them, Grace Two Stars watched with crossed arms, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. This true, John? Elaine asked without preamble. You've taken in a white child. John straightened his shoulders, found her abandoned. She was hungry. And you didn't think to call county services? Robert's tone carried decades of dealing with white authorities, planning to. Today, Grace stepped forward. At 76, she was the oldest council member. Let me see the child. Grace, Elaine began. I've lived through governance schools, forced adoptions and every policy meant to break us. Grace said sharply, I've earned the right to see this child before we make judgments. John hesitated, then nodded. Inside, Sarah pressed against the wall as 5 strangers entered. John moved to her side. This is Sarah, he said simply. Sarah, these are neighbors. Grace knelt despite her arthritic knees, meeting Sarah at eye level. Hello, little one. Sarah clutched her rabbit tighter, but didn't hide her face. You hungry? Grace asked. Sarah glanced at John, then shook her head. John made soup. Grace's weathered face softened. She touched the stuffed rabbit gently. And who's this? Bob, Sarah whispered. He looks very brave, Grace said, rising slowly. She turned to the others. She's been mistreated. Look at those old bruises. John had noticed them too, yellowish marks on Sarah's arms, a fading bruise near her temple. Robert shook his head. Not our problem. We call the county, let them handle it. Like they handled Standing Rock's grandchildren. Grace challenged. 3 years in the system before the tribe could get them back. This isn't a native child, Elaine pointed out. Different situation entirely. Human situation, Grace countered. The adults continued debating while Sarah pressed closer to John's side. He could feel her trembling. Enough, he said firmly. Not in front of her. The cabin fell silent. John Running Bear rarely raised his voice. Council meets at 7, Elaine finally said. Full attendance. You'll explain yourself there, John. After they left, Sarah remained glued to John's side. Are they taking me away? The fear in her voice struck something deep in John's chest. Not today, he promised. By evening, John had made 2 decisions. He'd bought Sarah clean clothes from the reservation store, ignoring the stares, and he'd called Linda Winters at County Social Services, leaving a message about finding an abandoned child, but not mentioning he'd kept her overnight. The tribal council building stood at the center of the reservation, a simple structure built in the inside. Wooden benches faced a curved table where council members sat. Tonight, those benches were full. Word had spread. John entered with Sarah, holding his hand. The room hushed. Many had come out of curiosity, others from concern. Some faces showed outright disapproval. Thomas had saved them seats in front. Sarah climbed onto the bench, her legs dangling above the floor. She wore new jeans and a purple sweater, her hair freshly washed. The rabbit, Bob, sat in her lap. Elaine called the meeting to order, her voice carrying authority despite her small frame. We're here to address an unusual situation. John Running Bear has brought a non-native child onto reservation land. For the next 20 minutes, council members questioned John. Where exactly had he found us? Had he notified authorities? What did he intend to do? John answered truthfully, but briefly, his discomfort with public speaking evident. Finally, Robert Tallbear addressed the room. This puts the tribe in a difficult position. County officials will ask why he didn't immediately report finding her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone understood the implication. A native man keeping a white child overnight would raise suspicions. I've called social services, John said. Left a message. After the fact, Robert countered. Mary Littlefeather stood from the audience. As the reservation school teacher, her voice carried weight. The child appears well cared for. Whatever circumstances brought her here, John acted with humanity. Sarah, sensing she was the subject of discussion, pressed closer to John. Grace, 2 stars, spoke last, her voice quiet but firm. I've seen this child's eyes. She's known harm, and for once found kindness. We talk about our values. Here's where we live them. The council voted 7-2. John could keep Sarah temporarily, while authorities investigated, provided he fully cooperate with county services. As they left the meeting, Thomas clapped John's shoulder. You just made life complicated, brother. John watched Sarah walking ahead, her hand trailing along the wooden wall. Maybe it needed complicating. For the first time in years, he felt something stir beneath his carefully constructed isolation, a sense of purpose, and the unexpected weight of responsibility. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin window as John awkwardly held the small red hairbrush Mary Littlefeather had brought along with children's clothes and books. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor in front of him, her back straight. Wait, I'm not good at this, John admitted, hesitantly touching the brush to her tangled blonde hair. Mom says count to 100, Sarah offered. That's how long it takes. John began brushing gently, counting aloud. Sarah winced when he hit a knot, but didn't cry out. By the count of 37, he'd established a rhythm. By 62, her hair began to shine. At 89, she relaxed her shoulders slightly. 100, John announced, setting the brush down. Sarah touched her hair carefully. It doesn't hurt when you do it. The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Mary arrived at 10, carrying more supplies. 3 days had passed since the council meeting. County social worker Linda Winters had visited once, taken notes on Sarah's condition, and promised to investigate her background. The system moved slowly, especially for cases involving the reservation. Brought some books, Mary said, setting a canvas bag on the table. In her 40s, with practical short hair and kind eyes, she'd taught at the reservation school for 15 years. Sarah, come see, John called. The girl approached cautiously. Mary knelt, pulling out picture books. Do you like stories? Sarah nodded, eyes wide at the colorful covers. This one's about a rabbit, Mary said, extending a book with a floppy-eared character. Sarah reached for it, then stopped, looking at John. It's okay, he said. They're for you. While Sarah examined the books, Mary spoke quietly to John. Any word about her family? Linda's checking police reports from neighboring counties. Nothing yet. The children at school are curious about her. John tensed. She's not ready for that. Of course, Mary agreed. But eventually, Eventually isn't today, John said firmly. Mary didn't push. Instead, she joined Sarah on the floor, opening one of the books. Shall we read together? John watched from the kitchenette as Mary read, her voice animated with different character tones. Sarah inched closer, eventually leaning against Mary's arm to see the pictures better. The simple trust in the gesture made John's chest tighten. After Mary left, Sarah carried her favorite book to John. Will you read it? John stared at the unfamiliar words, a secret he'd kept for decades pressed against his consciousness. I don't read so good, he admitted. Sarah considered this. I can read some words. Teacher showed me. She opened the book, pointing at simple words. Cat, hat, sat. Together they worked through the story, Sarah reciting words she recognized, John stumbling through the rest. When they finished, Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. We did good, she declared. That night, Sarah had another nightmare. John woke to her whimpering, caught in terror's grip. He approached carefully, speaking softly, until she woke. The bad men were coming, she whispered, clutching Bob the rabbit. No bad men here, John promised. He retrieved the red hairbrush from the table. Want me to brush your hair? Might help you sleep. Sarah nodded. John sat on the edge of the bed, brushing gently and counting. By 35, her eyes were drooping. By 50, she was asleep, the brush still moving rhythmically through her hair. He continued to count anyway, reaching 100 before setting the brush aside. The next morning, Linda Winters called. We found a police report, she said without preamble. Meth lab bust in Fairmont County 2 weeks ago. Mother arrested. Jessica Miller. Matches Sarah's description of events. Where was Sarah during the arrest? John asked, stepping outside so she wouldn't hear. That's just it, Linda said. No child was reported at the scene. Officers never saw her. The implication hit John hard. Her mother left her before the raid. Appears so. Abandoned her with that note before police arrived. John's hand tightened on the phone. What happens now? Jessica Miller's serving 6 months minimum. No father listed on birth certificate. I'm checking for relatives. After hanging up, John stood motionless in the yard, processing the information. Sarah had been abandoned twice, once by the dumpster and once by the system that never knew to look for her. Inside, he found Sarah brushing her own hair, lips moving as she counted quietly. When she reached 100, she looked up with pride. I did it all myself, she announced. John nodded, something fierce and protective stirring within him. You sure did. That afternoon, they established a routine, reading practice, drawing pictures, simple Apache words that Sarah repeated with perfect pronunciation. When evening came, John brushed her hair again, counting to 100. Will I stay here tomorrow too? Sarah asked, as he reached 98. Yes, John said. Tomorrow too. And after tomorrow? John's hand paused briefly, then continued. We'll see. But in that moment something shifted between them. A tentative future, taking shape, brushstroke by brushstroke, count by count. The cruiser's arrival sent dust billowing across the yard. John watched from the window as Sheriff Miller stepped out, adjusting his belt before retrieving a clipboard from the passenger seat. Behind him, a county vehicle parked, and Linda Winters emerged with another man in a suit. Sarah, John said quietly. Remember what we talked about. Some people need to ask you questions. Sarah nodded solemnly, clutching Bob to her chest. The past week had established a fragile routine between them, one now threatened by the official vehicles outside. John opened the door before they could knock. Sheriff Miller nodded curtly. Running Bear, this is Harold Jenkins from the county prosecutor's office. The sheriff's eyes swept past John, searching the cabin interior. The child here, her name is Sarah, John said, stepping aside to let them enter. Sarah remained seated at the small table where she'd been drawing. Her eyes grew wide at the sheriff's uniform, but she didn't hide. Linda approached her first. Hello again, Sarah. Remember me from the other day? Sarah nodded. These men need to ask you some questions about your mom. Is that okay? Sarah looked to John, who gave her an encouraging nod. Sheriff Miller crouched to Sarah's level, but kept a professional distance. Sarah, I need to know about the last time you saw your mom. She said, wait by the big trash can, Sarah said quietly. She was crying. Did she say she'd come back? Sarah nodded. But she didn't. Was anyone with her? A man, maybe? Sarah's grip on Bob tightened. Uncle Rat. The adults exchanged glances. Uncle Rat? Miller repeated. Not a real uncle, Sarah explained, with a child's logic. He has teeth like a rat. Jenkins stepped forward. Sounds like Ricky Talbot, he told Miller. Goes by Rat. Known associate of Jessica Miller. The sheriff made notes on his clipboard. Sarah, did your mom and this man argue? Sarah's lower lip trembled. He hit her, said she took his stuff. What kind of stuff, honey? The special candy, in the little bags. John clenched his jaw as Miller continued questioning Sarah about the special candy and the men who came to their house. The girl's answers painted a clear picture of a meth operation, one where she'd been a silent witness to everything. Finally, Linda intervened. I think that's enough for now, Jenkins frowned. We need a full statement if we're going to add child endangerment charges. She's 5 years old, Linda said firmly. You've got enough to start with. Miller closed his notebook, then turned his attention to John. How exactly did you find her again? John recounted the discovery by the dumpster, aware of the skepticism in Miller's eyes. And your first instinct wasn't to bring her to authorities? The question carried an edge. My first instinct was to help a hungry child. John replied evenly. By bringing her to the reservation, rather than the police station 10 minutes away. John met the sheriff's gaze. She was scared, traumatized, convenient. Miller's tone made the implication clear that John's actions were suspicious at best. Linda stepped between them. Sheriff, I've been monitoring this situation since John called me. Sarah is well cared for here. Temporarily, Jenkins emphasized. Now that we've identified her, proper placement protocols need to be followed. The word placement hung in the air. Sarah, who had been quietly drawing, looked up sharply. Am I going away? She asked, her voice small. We need to find the right home for you, Linda explained gently. I want to stay with John. The simplicity of her statement silenced the room. Miller shook his head. That's not how this works. Why not? The question came from John, surprising even himself. Jenkins sighed as if explaining to a child. Mr. Running Bear, there are procedures. Native American foster homes for native children. White homes for white children, John finished. I know the Indian Child Welfare Act. I also know Sarah has nowhere else to go right now. There are emergency placement options, Jenkins countered. With strangers, John said. More strangers, more questions, more fear. Linda cleared her throat. Sarah has established trust with John. Disrupting that immediately could cause additional trauma. A silent exchange passed between Linda and Jenkins. Finally, Miller spoke. We'll need to discuss this with family court. In the meantime, he looked uncomfortable. She can remain here provided regular welfare checks continue. After they left, Sarah remained at the table, her crayon motionless in her hand. Do I have to go with them next time? John sat beside her, studying her drawing. A simple house, with 2 stick figures, standing outside, one tall, one small. Not today, he said. Not tomorrow. But someday. John couldn't bring himself to lie. I don't know, Sarah. She added another figure to her drawing. A man with a star on his shirt, standing apart from the house. Sheriff doesn't like you, she observed, with a child's blunt perception. No, John agreed. He doesn't, because you're Indian. The question, so direct, caught John off guard. Partly. Sarah considered this, then added something to her drawing. A line connecting the 2 stick figures, drawn so heavily it tore the paper slightly. What's that? John asked. So they can't separate us, she explained, as if it were obvious. We're connected now. Linda Winters spread the file folder across John's table, careful to keep her voice low as Sarah napped in the adjacent corner of the cabin. Jessica Miller, 26, she began, tapping a mugshot of a gaunt woman with hollow cheeks and angry eyes. 3 prior arrests for possession. This last one was manufacturing with intent to distribute. John studied the woman's face, searching for Sarah in her features. The child had the same delicate nose, but where Sarah's eyes held hope despite everything, her mother's showed only emptiness. She's refusing to discuss Sarah, Linda continued. Claims she doesn't know what happened to her daughter, says maybe Rat took her. She's lying, John said, his voice flat. Obviously, but without her cooperation, we're piecing things together slowly. Linda pulled out another document. We found Jessica's last known address, a rental outside Fairmont. Sheriff's Department is letting us access it tomorrow to look for Sarah's birth certificate, medical codes, anything that might help establish her history. I'm coming with you, John said. Not a question. Linda hesitated. John, that's not protocol. Sarah trusts me. If there's anything of hers there, she'll need someone she trusts to handle it. Their conversation was interrupted by movement from the corner. Sarah sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She spotted the papers and photographs scattered across the table and went still. That's my mom, she said, her voice small but certain. Linda quickly gathered the mugshot, but Sarah had already seen it. She approached the table cautiously. Is she in jail? Linda and John exchanged glances. Yes, Linda answered gently. She is. Sarah absorbed this without visible emotion. Because of the special candy? Yes, Linda said. The special candy is very dangerous. It's against the law to have it. Sarah nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. She reached for the crayons Mary had brought and began drawing on a blank sheet of paper. Sarah, Linda asked carefully, would you draw your old house for me, the one where you lived with your mom? Without looking up, Sarah began sketching. A lopsided rectangle formed a house, small squares for windows, a larger rectangle for a door. Then, to the side, she drew another smaller structure. What's that? Linda asked. The special candy house, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. We're not allowed inside. Linda leaned closer. Who wasn't allowed inside? Me and Mommy sometimes. Sarah added stick figures near the smaller structure. Only Uncle Rat and his friends could go in when the candy was cooking. John and Linda watched in silence. As Sarah continued drawing, she added more stick figures, men with angry faces. One had pointed teeth. That's Uncle Rat, she explained, pointing to the sharp-toothed figure. And that's Terry and Big Mike. Each name was delivered with the casual acceptance of a child, stating simple facts. Sarah switched to a black crayon, heavily shading one of the house's windows. This is my room. It has blankets on the windows so no one can see in. Were you scared there? Linda asked. Sarah didn't answer directly. Instead, she drew a small figure under what appeared to be a bed. This is the quiet place. When grown-ups yell or hit, I go here. She looked up suddenly. John doesn't hit. No, John agreed quietly. I don't hit. Sarah returned to her drawing, adding a final figure outside the house. A woman with long hair sitting in what looked like a car. This is Mommy leaving. She said wait by the big trash, but don't tell anyone my name or where I live. Linda made notes while Sarah continued adding details to her picture. When the child finished, Linda asked if she could keep the drawing. Sarah nodded, already starting on another. After Linda left with the drawing and her notes, John sat beside Sarah at the table. You okay? Sarah concentrated on her new picture, this one of John's cabin. Is Mommy coming to get me when she's out of jail? The question John had been dreading. I don't know. I don't want to go back to the candy house, Sarah whispered. You won't, John promised, certainty hardening in his chest. Never again. The next day, Mary stayed with Sarah while John and Linda drove to Fairmont County. The rental house sat at the end of a gravel road, its yard littered with discarded furniture and trash. Yellow police tape still crossed the detached garage, the candy house from Sarah's drawing. Inside, the house smelled of chemicals and neglect. Sarah's room was easy to identify, tiny with blankets nailed over the window just as she'd drawn. A stained mattress lay on the floor. No toys except a few broken plastic figures, no books, no pictures on the walls. John knelt, looking under the bed. In the dusty space, he found a small box containing a birth certificate, a tattered photo of Sarah as an infant with her mother, and a tiny bracelet. Found something, he called to Linda. As they drove back to the reservation, the small box on his lap, John's resolve solidified into something unbreakable. The system that had failed this child would not be given another opportunity to do so. I want to apply for emergency foster placement, he told Linda. Officially, Linda kept her eyes on the road. John, you know the legal hurdles. Cross-cultural placement is... Look at that house, John interrupted. Look at her drawings. The system wasn't there for her then. Why should it decide what's best for her now? Linda was quiet for a long moment. I'll bring the paperwork tomorrow, she finally said. But I can't promise anything. It was a start. For the first time in decades, John found himself saying a silent prayer to whatever spirits might be listening. Hold it gently, John instructed, watching Sarah's small fingers close around the eagle feather. In our way, this is sacred, a gift from Eagle, who flies highest and sees farthest. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah arrived. The emergency foster placement forms sat completed on the table, awaiting Linda's return from a conference in the state capital. In this suspended time, John found himself sharing pieces of his heritage he'd long kept private. It's soft, Sarah observed, stroking the feather carefully. My grandfather gave it to me when I came back from Vietnam, John said. To help heal bad dreams. Sarah looked up. Like my bad dreams? Similar, maybe. Does it work? John considered the question. Some nights, the cabin had transformed subtly. Children's books stacked neatly by the wood stove. A small mattress now occupied the corner, covered with the colorful quilt Mary had sewn. Sarah's drawings decorated one wall, her evolving artwork showing fewer shadows and angry faces as the days passed. Can I put it under my pillow? Sarah asked. For tonight, John agreed. But remember, we don't own sacred things. We're just taking care of them for a while. Sarah nodded solemnly, placing the feather beside Bob the rabbit. A knock interrupted them. Thomas Blackhawk entered without waiting for an answer. A reservation custom among old friends. Council meeting tonight, he announced, then nodded to Sarah. Hello, little one. Sarah had grown comfortable with Thomas's visits. I'm learning about eagles, she told him. Good teacher you've got, Thomas replied, then turned to John. David Running Wolf is back from law school. Wants to meet you. John raised an eyebrow. David was the reservation's first member to attend law school, a source of community pride. What for? Your case, Thomas said simply. Word got back to him. He's interested. That evening, Mary came to watch Sarah while John attended the council meeting. As he prepared to leave, Sarah followed him to the door. You'll come back? She asked, the question carrying echoes of abandonment. John crouched to her level. Always, I promise. At the council building, David Running Wolf waited outside. Younger than John expected, with short hair and glasses, wearing a button-down shirt and jeans. John Running Bear, David greeted him, extending his hand. Heard you're challenging about a century of federal Indian law. John shook his hand cautiously, just trying to do right by a child. Inside, the meeting room buzzed with conversation that fell silent as they entered. Elaine Whitecloud called the room to order. Before regular business, David Running Wolf has asked to address the council regarding John Running Bear's foster application. David approached the front, his manner shifting from casual to professional. The Indian Child Welfare Act was created to stop the removal of native children from their communities, he began. It was a response to decades of cultural genocide through family separation. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. But today we face a different situation. A non-native child placed with a native guardian. The law doesn't specifically address this reverse scenario. John listened intently as David outlined legal precedents, possible challenges, and potential approaches. The young lawyer spoke with passion about how the reservation could support John's application. The county will argue that cross-cultural placement isn't in the child's best interest, David concluded. We need to demonstrate that Sarah's unique circumstances make John's home the best placement for her specifically. After the meeting, community members approached John, some offering support, others expressing concerns. Grace, 2 stars, pressed a small beaded bracelet into his hand. "For the child," she said. "My granddaughter made it." Later, walking home under star-filled skies, John realized something had shifted. What began as his solitary decision had somehow become a community matter. Inside the cabin, he found Sarah asleep, the eagle feather peeking out from beneath her pillow. Mary sat reading by lamplight. She waited as long as she could. Mary whispered, "Made me check the time every 5 minutes." John nodded his thanks as Mary gathered her things to leave. At the door, she hesitated. "John, she asked me something today. Asked if you could be her father." The word struck him like a physical blow. "What did you tell her?" "That she should ask you herself." Mary touched his arm gently. "But if you're going this far for her, you should know. That's how she sees you." After Mary left, John sat beside Sarah's sleeping form. The enormity of what he'd started pressed on him. He was no longer just providing temporary shelter. Somewhere in these quiet weeks of shared meals, hair brushing and stories, something permanent had taken root. Sarah stirred, her eyes opening slightly. "You came back," she murmured sleepily. "I promised, didn't I?" John adjusted her blanket. "The feather kept bad dreams away," she informed him, already drifting back to sleep. John gently stroked her hair. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." Outside, an owl called into the night. According to Apache tradition, owls carried messages from the spirit world. Tonight, John chose to believe it was his grandfather's approval. For a man who had spent decades keeping the world at a distance, the tiny hand curled trustingly near his own represented a journey he never expected to take. One that would require strength he wasn't sure he possessed, and would challenge boundaries he'd thought immovable. Yet watching Sarah sleep peacefully with the eagle feather beneath her pillow, John knew some paths, once started, could not be abandoned. The county courthouse loomed like a stone fortress. John adjusted his borrowed tie, feeling the weight of his grandfather's pocket watch in his jacket. He'd found it this morning while searching for something suitable to wear, tucked away in an old cigar box, its silver case tarnished, but the mechanism still ticking stubbornly after decades. Sarah had watched with solemn eyes as he dressed in his only button-down shirt and slacks. "You looked like the men at the office," she'd observed, her reference to some half-remembered authority figures from her past. "Different kind of man," John had assured her. Now he stood on the courthouse steps with David Runningwolf beside him, Linda Winters waiting at the top. For the past month, David had worked tirelessly preparing for this preliminary hearing, the first official step in John's petition for permanent guardianship. "Remember," David said quietly, "let me do the talking. Judge Matthews is fair, but traditional. He'll be looking for any reason this arrangement doesn't fit the usual protocols." Inside, the courtroom's polished wood and formal atmosphere made John's collar feel tighter. He reached into his pocket, fingers finding the smooth contours of the watch. His grandfather had carried it through years of broken treaties and false promises. Some battles required weapons, others endurance. Judge Matthews entered, a gray-haired man with penetrating eyes. The proceedings began with clinical efficiency. Linda presented her report first, her professional demeanor occasionally softening when describing Sarah's progress. "The child has shown remarkable improvement in emotional stability," she testified. "Nightmares have decreased from nightly to occasional. She's engaging in age-appropriate play and learning basic academic skills with the help of a reservation teacher." The county's attorney, Diane Reynolds, cross-examined with practiced precision. "And in your professional opinion, Winters, would Sarah's development be better served in a traditional foster setting with, perhaps, a 2-parent household?" "Sarah has formed a secure attachment to Mr. Running Bear," Linda replied carefully. Disrupting that attachment would likely cause significant regression. Judge Matthews interrupted. Ms. Winters, I understand your concern for the child's current stability, but we must consider long-term cultural integration. How does Mr. Running Bear address the child's need to develop within her own cultural context? Before Linda could answer, the courtroom door opened. Mary Littlefeather entered, carrying a folder. She nodded apologetically to the judge and took a seat behind John. When David rose to present John's petition, he called Mary as a surprise witness. She approached the stand with quiet confidence. Ms. Littlefeather, you're an educator on the reservation? David asked. Yes, I've been teaching for 15 years with a master's degree in early childhood education. And you've been working with Sarah? Mary opened her folder. 3 times weekly. I've been assessing her educational needs and providing structured learning activities. She handed documents to the clerk. These are her progress reports, showing significant advancement in literacy and numeracy since arriving at Mr. Running Bear's home. David continued, has Mr. Running Bear impeded Sarah's connection to her own cultural background? On the contrary, Mary replied, he's actively encouraged it. When I brought children's books featuring diverse families, John requested more with white protagonists to ensure Sarah sees herself represented. She smiled slightly. He also asked for books about Native children, so Sarah understands both worlds. Reynolds objected repeatedly, but Mary's testimony stood firm. When she finished, Judge Matthews studied the progress reports with careful attention. John remained silent throughout, his hand occasionally slipping to the pocket watch. Time moved differently here, measured in legal terms and procedures, rather than the natural rhythms he and Sarah had established. Near the hearing's conclusion, Reynolds introduced her most challenging argument. Your Honor, we've located a maternal second cousin of Sarah's in Idaho. Janice Peterson has expressed willingness to take custody of the child. As a blood relative, she would have priority under standard placement protocols. The courtroom fell silent. This was new information, a sudden complication in what was already difficult terrain. Judge Matthews turned to Linda. Has Miss Peterson been vetted? We're conducting preliminary background checks. Linda admitted, but she has no prior relationship with Sarah. They've never met. David quickly countered. Your Honor, introducing an unknown relative at this stage would create precisely the kind of disruption that Miss Winters has testified would harm Sarah's progress. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I'm extending the temporary guardianship for 60 days, pending further investigation of this relative placement option. Mr. Running Bear will retain temporary custody, with weekly supervision from county services. Outside the courthouse, John stood motionless, processing the outcome. Not a loss, but not the resolution he'd hoped for. Mary touched his arm gently. 60 days is time, John. Time for Sarah to become even more settled, for the cousin's background to be thoroughly examined. David nodded agreement. Judge Matthews is being cautious, but he seemed impressed with Sarah's progress. John fingered the pocket watch, thinking of his grandfather's patience through years of injustice. Sarah will be waiting for me to come home, he said simply, turning toward the parking lot. The watch ticked steadily in his pocket as he drove back to the reservation. Like the mechanism inside it, some things continued despite the odds, marking time toward an uncertain but possible future. The community center buzzed with voices. What began as a tribal council meeting had expanded when word spread about the town meeting being held simultaneously at Fairmont City Hall. Now residents from both communities had converged in one space, filling the room beyond capacity. John sat near the back, Sarah beside him coloring quietly in a book. Mary had given her. He hadn't wanted to bring her, but no one was available to watch her tonight. Everyone was here. Elaine Whitecloud stood at the podium, trying to maintain order as speakers from both communities took turns addressing the gathering. The discovery of a white child being raised on the reservation had become front-page news in the regional paper. Cultural custody battle read yesterday's headline. We have lived as neighbors for generations, Elaine reminded the crowd. This situation concerns one child, one family. A middle-aged white woman from town stood. This isn't about neighbors, it's about what's best for the child. She should be with her own kind. Murmurs rippled through the room. Thomas Blackhawk rose slowly. And what kind is that exactly? The kind that abandoned her by a dumpster with a note saying she was hungry. That's not fair, another townsperson called out. One bad mother doesn't represent all of us. Just like one good native man doesn't change how your people have treated our children for centuries, someone countered from the reservation side. The debate grew heated. Sarah pressed closer to John's side, her crayon stilled on the page. He considered leaving, but knew his absence would be interpreted as weakness. Unexpectedly, Sheriff Miller entered the room. Conversations hushed as he made his way to the front. "I didn't come to take sides," Miller began, his uniform adding weight to his words. "But there are facts that need addressing. First, Sarah Miller was abandoned by her mother, who is currently serving time for methamphetamine production. Second, no relative stepped forward when she went missing. Not one person reported a 5-year-old child's disappearance." He paused, scanning the room, until John Running Bear found her. "This child was invisible to everyone, including my department. Those are the facts." A momentary silence fell before Robert Tolbert. "So why is everyone suddenly concerned about her welfare now that she's being cared for by a native man?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortably direct. Pastor Williams from the town's Methodist church stood. "I believe we should focus on the child's needs rather than our own prejudices. I've seen Mr. Running Bear bring Sarah to our library reading program. He waits patiently while she participates. That speaks volumes about his character." John felt Sarah tugging his sleeve. "Why are they talking about me?" she whispered. "Because they care what happens to you," he answered softly, though the truth was more complicated. David Running Wolf took the podium next, his legal training evident in his measured tone. "The Indian Child Welfare Act was created to keep native families together after decades of forced separation. The irony here is that we're facing resistance for doing exactly what white institutions have done for centuries, deciding what's best for a child of another culture." The debate continued, revealing deep fractures and unexpected alliances. Some reservation residents argued that taking in a white child would only bring trouble. Others defended John's right to raise Sarah, regardless of her background. Grace Two Stars, who rarely spoke at public gatherings, finally rose. The room quieted out of respect for her age and standing. "When I was 7, she began, her voice thin but clear. "Government agents came to my family's home. They took me to a boarding school where they cut my hair, changed my name, and punished me for speaking our language. They said it was for my own good, to civilize me." She turned, finding Sarah in the crowd. "I see this child at our community meals. She is learning 2 languages, 2 cultures. She is not being erased, she is being enriched." Grace looked directly at the town residents. "If you truly care about her welfare, ask yourselves who is truly offering her more." As the meeting concluded without resolution, John led Sarah outside. The night air provided relief from the heated room. They walked toward his truck, passing the massive split oak that marked the reservation boundary. A tree struck by lightning decades ago, its trunk divided, but still standing. Sarah stopped, looking up at the divided oak. "That tree is broken," she observed. "Not broken," John corrected, "just growing in 2 directions now." On the drive home, Sarah was unusually quiet. Finally, as they turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, she asked, "Why don't some people want me to stay with you?" John gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Sometimes people get scared of things that are different. Because you're Apache and I'm not? Something like that." Sarah considered this. "But we're not scared." "No," John agreed. "We're not." That night, after Sarah was asleep, John sat on the cabin steps watching distant headlights move along the highway. The community meeting had made clear that his private decision had become a public symbol, something larger than just him and Sarah. Thomas's truck appeared, gravel crunching as he parked. He settled beside John on the steps, offering him a thermos of coffee. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Thomas said after a while. John nodded. "I know. You still sure about this path?" John thought of Sarah's question. "We're not scared, are we?" And the simple trust behind it. "Never been more sure of anything," he answered. Dr. Eleanor Redmond adjusted her glasses and smiled at Sarah across the small table. The child psychologist had been appointed by the court to evaluate Sarah and provide expert testimony about her well-being and placement preferences. "This is a voice recorder," Dr. Redmond explained, placing the small silver device between them. "It helps me remember everything we talk about. Is that okay with you?" Sarah nodded, eyes fixed on the recorder. John sat in the corner of the room at Prairie Child Services, close enough for Sarah to see him, but far enough to give her space. "Sarah, can you tell me about living with John?" Dr. Redmond asked, after starting the recorder. Sarah glanced at John before answering. "He makes good eggs, and he brushes my hair without hurting. And he teaches me Apache words." "Do you like learning Apache words?" "Yes, I can count to 20. And say hello, and thank you and rabbit." Dr. Redmond smiled. "That's wonderful. Do you remember living with your mom?" Sarah's expression clouded. "Sometimes Mom couldn't wake up. I had to be really quiet. And how do you feel about your mom now?" Sarah twisted the hem of her shirt. "She's in jail because of the special candy. John says she's sick and needs to get better." Dr. Redmond nodded. "I heard there might be another person who could take care of you. Your mum's cousin Janice. How do you feel about maybe living with her?" "I don't know her," Sarah said simply. "I want to stay with John." "Why do you want to stay with John?" Sarah's answer came without hesitation. "He always comes back when he says he will." The evaluation continued for nearly an hour. Sarah's responses were direct, occasionally revealing glimpses of her past life. Nights spent hungry, adults who screamed and broke things, hiding places she'd found when the bad men came to the house. When Dr. Redmond finally turned off the recorder, she crouched to Sarah's level. "You did so well today. Would you like to draw a picture while I talk to John for a few minutes?" Sarah moved to a small play area while Dr. Redmond motioned John to join her at the table. "She's remarkably articulate for her age," the psychologist observed. "Though that often happens with children from unstable environments, they develop certain skills early out of necessity. Will your report help our case?" John asked directly. Dr. Redmond chose her words carefully. "I'm required to be neutral, but I will say that Sarah shows clear attachment to you. She also demonstrates appropriate developmental progress. Both are positive indicators, and her preference to stay with me. The court considers a child's wishes, especially when expressed as clearly as Sarah's, but it's one factor among many." Dr. Redmond glanced toward Sarah. "I am concerned about one thing. She mentioned nightmares about men coming to take her away. Do you know what that's about?" John sighed. "The custody situation has become public. She overheard conversations at the community meeting, and Linda mentioned a possible visit from her mother's cousin. Children absorb more than we realize," Dr. Redmond cautioned. "She needs reassurance and honesty in age-appropriate terms." Later that evening, Linda arrived at the cabin with papers for John to sign. Sarah was already asleep, exhausted from the day's emotional demands. "Dr. Redmond called me," Linda said, setting her briefcase on the table. She was impressed with Sarah's progress. "Will it be enough?" John asked. Linda's expression was guarded. "Janice Peterson's home study was completed yesterday. She has a stable job, a 3-bedroom house, and no criminal record. On paper, she looks like an ideal placement." "On paper," John repeated flatly. "The court date is set for next Thursday." Linda continued. "Sarah will need to appear, but she won't have to speak in open court. Dr. Redmond's recorded interview will be submitted as evidence." After Linda left, John sat alone at the table. The hearing would determine whether Sarah stayed with him or moved to Idaho with a stranger who happened to share her blood. Despite months of progress, it could all unravel in a single afternoon. Morning brought rain pattering against the cabin. John found Sarah already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with paper and crayons. "What are you drawing?" he asked, putting water on for coffee. "A letter," Sarah replied, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Mary showed me how to write some words." John peered over her shoulder. In wobbly letters, Sarah had written, "Dear John," followed by a carefully drawn picture of herself holding hands with a stick figure that was clearly meant to be John. "It says, 'Dear Judge,'" Sarah explained. "I'm telling him I want to stay with you." She pointed to another figure she was drawing. "This is Bob. He wants to stay too." John swallowed hard against the tightness in his throat. "That's a good letter. Mary says the judge needs to know what I want." Sarah added more details to her drawing. "So I'm telling him." John watched her work, marveling at her determination. From the traumatized child he'd found by the dumpster had emerged this resilient spirit, now fighting in her own way to secure her future. "Can I bring this to court?" Sarah asked. "Yes," John promised. "The judge will see it." Sarah nodded, satisfied, and continued drawing. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle patter, and a thin beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the small table where Sarah worked. Finding her voice, one crayon stroke at a time. The county courthouse seemed even more imposing. The second time, John adjusted his tie while Sarah fidgeted with the beaded bracelet on her wrist. A small craft project she'd completed with Mary's help, alternating white and turquoise beads in a pattern of her own design. "Remember what we talked about," John said gently, as they climbed the stone steps. "You'll sit with Linda while I talk to the judge." Sarah nodded, her fingers still working the beads. "And I don't have to talk unless I want to." "That's right." Inside, the courtroom was more crowded than John expected. News of the case had spread beyond the reservation and town. A reporter scribbled notes in the back row. David Running Wolf waited at the defendant's table, his briefcase open and papers meticulously arranged. "Mr. Running Bear," David greeted him with a handshake. "Sarah, you look very nice today." Sarah had insisted on wearing her best outfit, a denim jumper and red shirt. Mary had bought her. Her hair was neatly braided, and the beaded bracelet provided a small flash of color at her wrist. "She's here," Linda whispered, nodding toward a woman entering with the county attorney. Janice Peterson was in her mid-40s, with short blonde hair and a crisp pantsuit. She resembled Sarah slightly around the eyes and nose, enough to establish the family connection beyond doubt. She glanced at Sarah with obvious interest, but maintained her distance as instructed by the court. Judge Matthews entered, and the proceedings began. The county presented its case first, establishing the facts of Sarah's discovery, her mother's current incarceration, and the identification of Janice Peterson as her closest available relative. When Peterson took the stand, she presented as the ideal candidate: stable employment, as an accountant, home ownership in a good school district, and no criminal record. "Ms. Peterson, what motivated you to seek custody of your cousin's child?" the county attorney asked. "Family responsibility," Peterson replied smoothly. "When I learned Jessica's daughter needed a home, I felt it was my duty to provide one. Blood ties matter, and your relationship with Jessica Liller. We weren't close as adults," Peterson admitted, "but I remember her as a child, before the drugs." David's cross-examination was methodical. "Ms. Peterson, prior to these proceedings, had you ever met Sarah?" "No, but, and when did you last have contact with Jessica Miller?" Peterson shifted slightly. "Approximately 8 years ago, at a family funeral." "So you were unaware of Sarah's existence until contacted by social services?" "Yes, but family is family." David nodded thoughtfully. "Ms. Peterson, are you familiar with Sarah's daily routine? Her favorite foods, the name of her stuffed rabbit?" Peterson flushed. "I haven't had the opportunity to learn those things yet." "No further questions," David concluded. When John took the stand, he felt Sarah's eyes following him. He'd practiced with David, preparing for the questions, but nothing could prepare him for the weight of this moment. "Miss Bear," David began, "please describe your relationship with Sarah." John cleared his throat. "I found her abandoned, scared, hungry. Over these months, I've helped her feel safe again. We have a routine, breakfast together, reading practice, walks in the evening." He paused. "She trusts me." "And how has Sarah adjusted to life on the reservation?" "She's thriving, learning Apache words alongside English, making friends at community gatherings. Mary Littlefeather provides educational support 3 times weekly." The county attorney's cross-examination was aggressive. "Mr. Running Bear, you have no experience as a parent, correct? Not before Sarah. And you live alone, in a one-room cabin with no family support system." John straightened. "I have the support of my community, and I've begun construction on an addition to my home, a proper bedroom for Sarah." "Admirable," the attorney acknowledged. "But do you believe you can provide the cultural context Sarah needs as she grows up? She is, after all, a white child." Before John could answer, Sarah's voice rose from the gallery. "John teaches me everything." Judge Matthews rapped his gavel gently. "Sarah, you'll have your chance to speak if you wish." The county attorney continued. "Running Bear, is it true you were diagnosed with PTSD after your military service in Vietnam?" David objected immediately. "Irrelevant and prejudicial, Your Honor. I'll allow it." Judge Matthews ruled. "The witness may answer." John met the attorney's gaze directly. "Yes, I received treatment at the VA hospital for 3 years after returning home. And this condition doesn't impact your ability to care for a child." "It taught me about trauma," John replied evenly, "about how to heal from it. Sarah and I understand each other that way." When Dr. Redmond presented her evaluation, her professional demeanor carried significant weight. The courtroom listened intently to her assessment of Sarah's progress and clear attachment to John. "In my professional opinion," she concluded, "disrupting the secure attachment Sarah has formed with Mr. Running Bear would likely cause significant psychological harm at this critical developmental stage." Finally, Judge Matthews addressed Sarah directly. "Sarah, I understand you brought something for me." Linda encouraged her forward. Sarah approached the bench, clutching her drawing, and looking suddenly very small in the formal setting. "I made this," she said, handing over her carefully colored letter. "It says I want to stay with John, and Bob does too." She held up her wrist, displaying her bracelet. "And I made this all by myself. John taught me how." Judge Matthews examined the drawing carefully. "Thank you, Sarah. This helps me understand what you want." After closing arguments, the judge announced he would review all evidence and issue his ruling the following morning. As the courtroom emptied, Janice Peterson approached John and Sarah in the hallway. "She looks like Jessica did at that age," Peterson observed, studying Sarah. Sarah pressed against John's leg, one hand protectively covering her beaded bracelet. "I just want what's best for her," Peterson said, addressing John directly for the first time. "So do I," John replied simply. The night passed slowly, Sarah falling asleep while John sat vigil by the window. Tomorrow would determine everything, whether the fragile world they'd built together would continue or be dismantled by a judge's decision. In the darkness, Sarah's beaded bracelet caught the moonlight from where she'd carefully placed it beside her bed, a small circle of connection, white and turquoise together, unbroken. Dawn broke with John already awake. Having barely slept, Sarah still dozed in her corner bed, unaware that today's ruling would shape her future. The cabin phone rang, a rare occurrence this early. "John, it's Linda. Can you come to the courthouse an hour early? There's been a development." His stomach tightened. "What kind of development?" "Just be here at 8. She hung up before he could press further. John woke Sarah gently, helping her dress and brush her hair. They ate breakfast in silence, the weight of expectation too heavy for conversation. As they drove toward town, Sarah finally spoke. "If the judge says I have to go away, can I still visit you?" The question pierced him. "Let's not think about that yet," he managed. The courthouse steps were empty when they arrived, the building just opening for the day. Linda waited in the hallway, outside Judge Matthews' chambers, pacing nervously. "What's happening?" John asked. Sheriff Miller asked to speak privately with the judge this morning. He's in there now. John frowned. Miller, why would he? The door opened, and Sheriff Miller emerged, nodding briefly to John before walking away. Judge Matthews appeared in the doorway. Mr. Running Bear, Miss Winters, please come in. Miss Peterson and the county attorney will join us shortly. Inside the judge's chambers, John sat stiffly while Sarah leaned against his side. The formal courtroom had been intimidating enough, but this intimate setting felt even more consequential. 10 minutes later, Janice Peterson arrived with the county attorney, both looking confused by the unscheduled meeting. Judge Matthews waited until everyone was seated before speaking. I've asked you here because I've received new information relevant to this case. He nodded toward a manila folder on his desk. Sheriff Miller brought this to my attention this morning. Miss Peterson, were you aware that your cousin Jessica attempted to contact you approximately 6 months ago? Peterson's surprise seemed genuine. No, Your Honor. Phone records indicate she called your home 3 times before Sarah was found. Sheriff Miller obtained this information while investigating the methamphetamine case. Peterson paled slightly. I never received any messages. There's more, the judge continued. Miller told investigators she reached out to family members for help with Sarah before her arrest, but was refused. He looked directly at Peterson. She specifically named you. That's not true, Peterson protested. I never knew about Sarah until social services contacted me. Judge Matthews studied her. Perhaps the messages were missed. However, this raises questions about Miss Miller's perception of family support. He turned to John. Mr. Running Bear, are you still willing to provide permanent guardianship for Sarah, understanding all the responsibilities that entails? Yes, Your Honor, John answered without hesitation. The judge nodded. I'm prepared to rule on this matter now, unless there are objections. The county attorney conferred briefly with Peterson, who appeared shaken by the revelations. After a moment, he addressed the court. Your Honor, in light of this new information, Ms. Peterson wishes to withdraw her petition for custody. A wave of relief washed over John so powerfully he nearly missed the judge's next words. Then I am granting permanent guardianship of Sarah Miller to John Running Bear, subject to regular reviews by social services for the first year. Outside the chambers, John knelt to Sarah's level. The judge says you can stay with me, for good. Sarah's face lit with understanding. Forever, forever, John confirmed. While Sarah celebrated with Linda, Sheriff Miller approached John. For a moment, the two men regarded each other silently, years of tension and mutual wariness between them. Miller spoke first. Vietnam. Right, what unit? 25th Infantry. You? Marines. Kisan, 68. John nodded, understanding dawning. Miller reached into his pocket, removing something small that glinted in the hallway light, a Vietnam service medal. Found this when I was going through old boxes, Miller said. Got me thinking about coming home. How nobody understood what we'd seen over there. He paused. When you mentioned PTSD in court yesterday, hit close to home. Is that why you brought the phone records to the judge? Miller replaced the medal in his pocket. Jessica Miller gave a full confession last week. Mentioned trying to get help for Sarah before things got bad, said family turned their backs. He shrugged. Thought the judge should have all the facts. Thank you, John said simply. Miller nodded. That little girl deserves stability. Just do right by her. He turned to leave, then stopped. The reservation's having a Veterans Day ceremony next month. Never attended before. Might this year. As Miller walked away, David Running Wolf approached with papers for John to sign. Sheriff Miller, David mused. Unexpected ally. Brothers in arms. John replied quietly. Complicated bond. The guardianship paperwork took less than 20 minutes to complete. As they left the courthouse, John was surprised to find a small gathering waiting. Mary, Thomas, Grace 2 Stars, and several others from the reservation, alongside Pastor Williams and a few townspeople. Word travels fast, Mary explained, hugging Sarah. We're here to celebrate. That evening, the reservation community hall hosted an impromptu celebration. Sarah moved confidently among people who had become her extended family, accepting congratulations and small gifts. Even some residents who had initially opposed John's guardianship came to offer support. Thomas found John watching from a corner. "You've started something here," the elder observed. "Something bigger than just you and Sarah." "Didn't mean to start anything," John replied. Thomas chuckled. "Most important things happen that way." Later, driving home under star-filled skies, Sarah dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted from the day's emotions. John glanced at her peaceful face, marveling at how this child had transformed not only his life, but had somehow begun healing divisions decades in the making. The cabin looked different as they approached. No longer a solitary man's refuge, but a home, with the half-constructed addition taking shape on the eastern wall. Sarah's future room with a window facing the sunrise. The autumn air carried wood smoke and the scent of roasting corn as the reservation prepared for its annual harvest gathering. John watched Sarah carefully paint the side of her small drum, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Grace Two Stars had gifted her the drum after the court decision. The deer hide stretched over a wooden frame no bigger than a dinner plate. "Not too much paint," John cautioned. "It needs to breathe to make good sound." Sarah nodded seriously, adding delicate pink petals to her flower design. The opposite side already bore traditional Apache symbols that John had helped her paint, lightning bolts and mountain patterns in earth-toned pigments. "When can I play it at the gathering?" she asked. "After the elders begin. You remember what Thomas taught you?" Sarah demonstrated the simple rhythm with her fingers, tapping lightly on the wooden table. 3 months had passed since the guardianship became official, and Sarah had embraced her unique position in the community with a child's natural adaptability. A truck rumbled outside and Mary Littlefeather appeared at the door, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Fry bread for the gathering," she announced, "and I brought Sarah's dress." Sarah abandoned her drum to inspect the small buckskin dress Mary held up. Not a costume, but a respectful garment, made by the women of the tribe, with simple beadwork along the hem. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "You'll wear it for the special dances," Mary explained, "and your regular clothes for the rest of the time. Remember, this isn't playing dress-up. The clothes have meaning." John appreciated Mary's careful guidance. From the beginning, she had helped Sarah navigate the delicate balance of honoring her Apache connections without appropriating or disrespecting the culture. Sarah was learning rather than taking. Pastor Williams called. Mary mentioned to John, "The church's Harvest Festival is next weekend." He specifically invited Sarah to participate. John nodded. This too was new. The deliberate inclusion from both communities. After initial resistance, many had come to see Sarah's situation as an opportunity rather than a threat. "Can I go?" Sarah asked. "Of course," John replied. "We'll bring your drum to both gatherings." The reservation's central clearing buzzed with activity by mid-afternoon. Food tables sagged under the weight of traditional dishes alongside modern additions. Children ran between decorated stalls while elders prepared the central fire pit. Sarah stayed close to John at first, clutching her drum, though accepted by the community. Large gatherings still triggered her weariness, too many echoes of chaotic scenes from her earlier life. Gradually, as familiar faces greeted them, her grip on John's hand loosened. "Running Bear," Thomas called, approaching with a young man John didn't recognize. "This is Michael Whitecloud, Elaine's nephew, just moved back from Phoenix, studying education." The young man shook John's hand. "And you must be Sarah," he said, crouching to her level. "I've heard a lot about you." Sarah regarded him cautiously. "I have a drum," she offered, holding it up. "Two sides," Michael observed. "Like having two worlds together. That's pretty special." His comment drew a smile from Sarah. John felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Pride mixed with something protective. Sarah's ability to connect with others had grown, but he remained vigilant about who entered her expanding circle. As twilight approached, the drummers took their positions around the fire. Thomas, as an elder, began the first rhythms. Other drummers joined, creating a heartbeat that seemed to rise from the earth itself. "Now," Sarah whispered. John nodded. Together they approached the circle, where space had been deliberately left for them. Sarah sat cross-legged, placing her small drum on her lap. John knelt behind her, guiding her hands until she found the rhythm, her drum's voice joining the larger pattern. Around them, dancers moved in traditional steps, their feet connecting with earth their ancestors had known for generations. Sarah watched with rapt attention, absorbing everything. During a break in the dancing, Grace Two Stars approached, her weathered hand gently touching Sarah's hair. "The drum speaks in two voices now," she observed, "just like our community." Later, as stars emerged overhead, Sarah participated in the children's dance, following the simple steps Mary had taught her. Her movements were earnest, careful, not mimicry, but respectful learning. The buckskin dress swayed with her motion, its subtle beadwork catching firelight. John watched from the circle's edge, aware of the complex journey that had brought them here. What began as a simple act of humanity, feeding a hungry child, had evolved into something transformative for them both. Sheriff Miller arrived as the evening deepened, out of uniform and visibly uncomfortable. John nodded in greeting, and the sheriff made his way over. "Nice gathering," Miller offered awkwardly. "Sarah's glad you came," John replied. "She's been practicing her drumming to show you." The simple acknowledgement of Miller's importance to Sarah eased the tension between them. They stood together watching the dancers, two men from different worlds finding common ground. Near the evening's end, children gathered for storytelling beside the fire. Sarah sat between two reservation children, her blonde hair striking against their darker heads, yet her posture and attention mirrored theirs perfectly. Mary joined John as he watched. "The school board approved my proposal," she said quietly. "Starting next month, Sarah can attend reservation classes with supplemental cultural education." "Both worlds," John murmured. "She'll be the bridge some of these children cross," Mary observed. "And they'll be her bridge too." As the gathering concluded, Sarah collected her drum, carefully wrapping it in the soft cloth Grace had provided. The instrument's two sides, traditional patterns and childish flowers, captured something essential about their journey together. On the drive home, Sarah clutched the drum to her chest, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep. "Can we go to the church festival too?" she asked, through a yawn. "Yes," John assured her. "Both belong to you now." Sarah nodded, satisfied. "I'll play my drum there too, so they can hear both sides." The call came on a Tuesday morning. John was helping Sarah with her reading at the kitchen table when Linda's voice came through the phone, measured but tense. "Jessica Miller's been released early, good behavior, and prison overcrowding." John's grip tightened on the receiver. "She's out already?" "She's entered a recovery program as a condition of her parole," Linda continued. "And she's requesting visitation with Sarah." The words hit like physical blows. 6 months had passed since the guardianship became official. Sarah was thriving, attending the reservation school 3 days a week and the town elementary twice weekly, a unique arrangement that Mary had helped orchestrate. Her nightmares had all but disappeared. "John, are you there? What does this mean legally?" he asked, turning away so Sarah wouldn't see his expression. "Your guardianship remains intact," Linda assured him. "But as her biological mother, Jessica has the right to supervised visitation, if deemed appropriate." After hanging up, John sat heavily in his chair. Sarah looked up from her book. "Who was that?" she asked. He'd promised never to lie to her. "That was Linda. Your mom is out of jail." Sarah went very still, her fingers frozen on the page. "Does she want me back?" "No, honey. You're staying with me. But she would like to see you." Sarah's face revealed a complex tangle of emotions, fear, confusion, and something else John recognized from his own experience, the complicated pull of blood ties, even when they're tangled with pain. "Do I have to?" "Not if you don't want to," John assured her. "But Linda thinks it might be good to at least meet with her once. I'll be with you the whole time." The visitation was arranged for the following week at the County Family Services Building, Neutral Territory, with professionals present. John spent the intervening days watching Sarah for signs of regression, but she remained focused on her normal routine, mentioning her mother only once, when asking if she could bring Bob the rabbit to the meeting. The morning of the visit, Sarah dressed carefully in her favorite overalls and the beaded bracelet she'd made. She placed her rabbit in a small backpack, along with a drawing she'd completed at school. "Ready?" John asked, as they prepared to leave. Sarah nodded solemnly. "I remember some things about her now," she said. Her voice was nice when she wasn't sad or angry. The family services building was clinical and impersonal. Linda met them in the lobby, leading them to a room furnished with comfortable chairs and a low table with toys and books, designed to feel casual while allowing for observation. "She's already here," Linda informed them. "Remember, I'll be in the room the entire time, and John can stay if Sarah wants." Sarah gripped John's hand tighter. "Don't leave." Jessica Miller sat waiting, almost unrecognizable from her mugshot. 6 months of incarceration followed by 30 days of recovery had transformed her physically. Her face had filled out, her hair was neatly trimmed, and her eyes, so similar to Sarah's, were clear and nervous. She stood when they entered, her hand moving unconsciously to touch something in her pocket. "Sarah," she breathed, taking a half step forward before stopping herself. Sarah pressed against John's side but didn't hide. "Hello," she said quietly. An awkward silence filled the room until Linda gently guided them to sit. Jessica perched on the edge of her chair, hands fidgeting in her lap. "You look good," she finally said to Sarah. "Health?" Sarah nodded, studying her mother with a child's direct gaze. "I go to school now, 2 schools. That's wonderful," Jessica replied. She glanced at John, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. "Thank you for taking care of her." John nodded once, keeping his expression neutral. This woman had abandoned her child by a dumpster. Gratitude couldn't begin to address what had happened. Jessica seemed to read his thoughts. "I know what I did was unforgivable," she said, her voice dropping. "I was desperate. The police were closing in. Rat was threatening me." She pulled something from her pocket, a small bronze coin. "I'm 30 days clean now. 1 day at a time, they say." Sarah watched her mother turn the sobriety chip between her fingers. "Do you still have the special candy?" she asked directly. Jessica flinched. "No, baby. No more of that. Ever." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "It made you scary." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes. "I know. I'm so sorry." Sarah reached into her backpack, removing the drawing she'd brought. A simple picture of herself, with John outside his cabin. She pushed it across the table. "This is where I live now," she explained. "With John, he doesn't yell or disappear." Jessica took the drawing with trembling hands. "It looks like a nice home." "It is," Sarah confirmed. "I have my own room now, and I'm learning Apache words, and I can read bigger books." As Sarah continued describing her life, Jessica listened intently, occasionally wiping tears. John watched the interaction closely, noting how Sarah maintained a careful emotional distance, while still engaging, protecting herself in a way no child should have to learn. Near the visit's end, Jessica addressed John directly. "I'm not going to fight you for her," she said quietly. "I can see she's happy, safe. I never gave her that." She turned back to Sarah. "But if it's okay, I'd like to see you sometimes. When I'm stronger, maybe we could just talk, and I could hear about your schools." Sarah looked to John, silently seeking guidance. He gave her a slight nod. This was her decision. "Maybe," Sarah said carefully, "if John comes too." After Jessica left, Sarah was unusually quiet on the drive home. As they neared the reservation, she finally spoke. "She looked different." "Yes," John agreed. "She's trying to get better, like your PTSD got better." Sarah had heard him use the term during conversations with Thomas. "Similar," John said, "but different kinds of healing." Sarah considered this. Her eyes were less scary. She observed, "But I still want to live with you, and you will," John assured her. "That's not changing." That night, Sarah had her first nightmare in months. John sat beside her bed, stroking her hair until she calmed. The mother's return had reopened wounds that had just begun to heal. A reminder that recovery for all of them wasn't a straight line, but a winding path with unexpected turns. Outside, an early winter wind rattled the cabin windows. John watched Sarah's sleeping face, wondering how this new chapter would unfold, and realizing that, like everything else in their journey together, they would navigate it one day at a time. Winter settled across the reservation, bringing short days and long, star-filled nights. 9 months had passed since John found Sarah by the dumpster. 3 months since Jessica Miller's release and first supervised visit. Now another milestone approached, the final adoption hearing that would legally make Sarah a permanent part of John's family. "Hold it like this," John demonstrated, guiding Sarah's small hands on the wooden carving tool. They sat at the kitchen table, working on pieces of soft pine. "Always cut away from yourself." Sarah's tongue poked between her teeth as she concentrated, carefully shaving thin curls from the wood. The simple owl shape was emerging slowly under her careful attention. "Linda's coming today?" she asked without looking up. "Yes, more paperwork before next week's hearing." Sarah nodded, focusing on her carving. These quiet moments of creation had become their ritual for managing anxiety. When Sarah's nightmares returned after seeing her mother, John had introduced her to carving, the simple, repetitive motions, providing a meditative calm they both needed. A knock at the door announced Linda's arrival. She stomped snow from her boots before entering, carrying her ever-present briefcase and a camera. "Final home study," she explained, setting up her materials. "The judge will want updated photos of Sarah's living environment." The cabin had transformed over the month. The new addition provided Sarah with her own bedroom, decorated with her artwork and books. The main room now held a proper dining table, bookshelves and comfortable chairs. Evidence of their shared life appeared everywhere. Sarah's school projects, John's carvings, and gifts from both communities. Jessica has submitted her formal consent to the adoption, Linda mentioned as she photographed the kitchen area. Her recovery counselor wrote a supporting statement. John nodded, absorbing the information. Jessica had maintained her sobriety for 90 days now, attending 3 more supervised visits with Sarah. The interactions remained cautious, but had gradually evolved from awkward to something approaching comfortable. "What about the cultural identity assessment?" John asked. Linda snapped another photo. "Dr. Redmond's report is excellent. She's documented Sarah's successful integration in both school environments and her healthy attachment to both her Apache and white identities." Sarah continued carving, seemingly absorbed in her work, but listening to every word. At 6, she had developed an uncanny ability to track adult conversations while appearing occupied. "And there's this," Linda added, retrieving a letter from her briefcase. Sheriff Miller submitted a personal recommendation to the court. This was unexpected. Though relations with Miller had improved, John hadn't anticipated his active support. After Linda completed her documentation, she sat with Sarah to review what would happen at the hearing. "The judge will ask you some questions," she explained. "Just like last time, but less formal. He'll want to know if you understand what adoption means." Sarah set down her carving tool. "It means John will be my forever dad, not just my guardian. My last name will be Running Bear instead of Miller." "That's right," Linda confirmed. "Are you okay with changing your name?" Sarah nodded decisively. "I picked it myself." Sarah, Running Bear sounds right. After Linda left, John and Sarah returned to their carving. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the wood shavings scattered on newspaper beneath their work. "Will my mom be at the hearing?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Linda says she plans to attend," John answered carefully. "Is that okay with you?" They considered this while making another careful cut in her wooden owl. "I think so. She's trying to get better." The complex relationship between Sarah and her mother had evolved into something neither John nor Jessica had anticipated. While Sarah remained firm about wanting to stay with John, she had cautiously allowed Jessica small spaces in her life, showing her school projects, accepting the occasional small gift, listening to Jessica's stories about her own childhood. "She told me she left me by the trash can because she knew someone good would find me there," Sarah said, her focus still on her carving. "She said people throw away good things sometimes, and other people find them. John's hands stilled on his own carving, a small bear taking shape under his practiced touch. The simple statement carried the weight of Jessica's most profound confession. "Do you believe her?" he asked gently. Sarah looked up, her eyes serious beyond her years. "I think she was very sick and scared, but maybe she did hope someone like you would find me." That evening, as snowflakes drifted past the windows, David Running Wolf visited with final preparations for the hearing. He spread documents across the table while Sarah worked on her carving in the corner. "The legal precedent we're establishing here is significant," David explained quietly. "Cross-cultural adoption with tribal support challenges decades of one-way assumptions about what's best for children." John glanced toward Sarah. "I'm not trying to make history, just trying to be her father." David smiled. "Sometimes that's how the most important changes happen." He gathered his papers. "We're as prepared as we can be. Judge Matthews has been fair throughout this process. I'm optimistic." After David left, John helped Sarah clean up the wood shavings. Her owl carving was taking clear shape now, its round eyes and curved beak emerging from the pine. "Will you bring your carving tools to the courthouse?" Sarah asked. "In case we have to wait, if you want." Sarah nodded. Carving makes the scary feelings smaller. John understood. The simple act of creation, of taking formless wood and revealing the shape waiting inside, had become their shared language for transformation. Each curled shaving represented something unnecessary falling away, revealing what was essential beneath. That night, John sat alone by the wood stove, after Sarah had gone to bed. He worked on a special carving, two figures, standing side by side, one tall and one small, their hands joined. It would be his gift to Sarah after the hearing, whatever the outcome. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the reservation in a blanket of silence. Inside, the gentle scrape of John's carving tool against wood provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the popping of the fire, a man shaping a new future from the raw materials life had unexpectedly provided. The courtroom filled early. Unlike the previous hearings held in near-empty chambers or with just a handful of observers, today people from both the reservation and town lined the cedar benches. Merry Little Feather sat with Grace Two Stars in the front row. Thomas Blackhawk and several tribal council members occupied one side, while Pastor Williams and a contingent from town filled the other. Sheriff Miller stood at the back in uniform, arms crossed. John sat beside David Running Wolf at the petitioner's table, his fingers occasionally tracing the smooth wood grain of the bench before him. Sarah, dressed in her best blue dress with her hair neatly braided, swung her legs beneath the table, her feet not quite reaching the floor. Linda Winters entered with Dr. Redmond, both carrying files. Behind them came Jessica Miller, looking nervous but composed in a simple blouse and skirt. Her recovery counselor accompanied her, carrying what appeared to be a small gift bag. John and Jessica exchanged brief nods across the room. Their relationship had evolved into a careful truce, centered entirely on Sarah's well-being. When Judge Matthews entered, the room fell silent. He surveyed the crowded courtroom with surprise before taking his seat. "I see this case has generated significant community interest," he observed. "Before we begin formal proceedings, I want to clarify that this hearing concerns the legal adoption of Sarah Miller by John Running Bear, with the biological mother's consent already submitted to the court." The proceedings began with David presenting the final adoption petition. He emphasized the stable home environment John had created, Sarah's successful integration into both reservation and town schools, and the unique cultural education she was receiving. "Your Honor, this case challenges us to move beyond traditional placement considerations," David concluded. "Sarah's situation demonstrates that cultural heritage need not be an either-or proposition, but can be a both-and opportunity for a child." Linda presented her final home study report next, followed by Dr. Redmond's assessment of Sarah's psychological well-being. Both professionals strongly recommended approval of the adoption. Sarah demonstrates secure attachment to Mr. Running Bear while maintaining a healthy understanding of her biological heritage. Dr. Redmond testified, the arrangement they've developed, with support from both communities, provides her with exceptional stability and cultural richness. The county attorney asked few questions, most directed at confirming that proper procedures had been followed. With Jessica's consent firmly established, there was little basis for opposition. Judge Matthews then called Jessica Miller to speak. She approached the witness stand, clutching a small notebook. Miss Miller, you've consented to this adoption. Do you wish to make a statement? Jessica nodded, opening her notebook with trembling hands. I want to make it clear that I support John Running Bear adopting my daughter, she began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. When I left Sarah that night, I was at rock bottom, addicted, afraid, and running from the law. I made the most desperate choice a mother could make. She paused, gathering herself. For a long time I told myself I left her there, hoping someone would find her quickly. The truth is, I wasn't thinking clearly enough to hope anything. I just needed to run. Jessica looked directly at John. But someone did find her, someone who has given her everything I couldn't. A stable home, safety, education, and most importantly, love. Turning back to the judge, she continued, I'm working hard on my recovery. I'm grateful that John has allowed me to have some contact with Sarah, but I know that his home is where she belongs, where she thrives. Signing those consent papers wasn't giving up my daughter. It was finally putting her needs before my own. When Jessica finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. She returned to her seat, briefly squeezing Sarah's shoulder as she passed. Judge Matthews then invited Sarah to his bench for a private conversation, a standard procedure in adoption cases involving children old enough to express their preferences. Sarah approached confidently, clutching the small wooden owl she had carved. Their conversation was brief, with Sarah answering the judge's questions clearly and showing him her carving. When she returned to her seat, she was smiling. After a short recess, Judge Matthews delivered his ruling. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find that the adoption of Sarah Miller by John Running Bear serves the child's best interests in every respect. He looked directly at John and Sarah. This court approves the petition for adoption and the requested name change to Sarah Running Bear, effective immediately. The gavel's sound was nearly drowned out by the spontaneous applause that erupted from the benches. Mary wiped tears while Thomas nodded approvingly. Even Sheriff Miller allowed himself a smile. Sarah threw her arms around John's neck. We did it, she whispered. Yes, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. We did. After signing the final documents, they made their way through well-wishers toward the exit. Jessica approached with her counselor, holding out the small gift bag. A small celebration present, she explained to Sarah, and a promise to keep working on my recovery. Inside the bag was a framed photograph of Jessica holding Sarah as an infant, the only baby picture Sarah had ever seen of herself. The simple gift acknowledged both the past they shared and the future they would navigate separately. Outside the courthouse, the winter sun broke through clouds, illuminating the snow-covered landscape. Members of both communities gathered around John and Sarah, offering congratulations and support. Grace, 2 stars, approached with a blanket woven in traditional Apache patterns, but incorporating some white and blue threads. For the child of 2 worlds, she explained, wrapping it around Sarah's shoulders. As they prepared to leave, David pulled John aside. Judge Matthews mentioned that your case is likely to be cited in future cross-cultural adoption proceedings. You've created an important precedent. John watched Sarah receiving hugs from Mary and other teachers from both schools. She's the one who brought everyone together, he replied. I just found her by the trash. The courthouse benches emptied as people dispersed, returning to their separate lives, yet somehow changed by their shared witness to this family's creation, a testament to how the boundaries between communities could be both honored and transcended through one child's journey from abandonment to belonging. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and the scent of renewal. 1 year had passed since John found Sarah by the dumpster. The anniversary hadn't gone unnoticed. Sarah had marked the date on their kitchen calendar with a simple drawing of a heart. Ready for the big reveal? John called, standing on the porch of their new home. Sarah ran from the truck, her boots leaving muddy prints across the damp earth. The house stood on a unique parcel of land, officially straddling the reservation boundary, with the front yard in town limits and the backyard on tribal land. When the property became available, the tribal council and town board had jointly helped secure it for them. "Can I open my eyes now?" Sarah asked, bouncing with excitement on the porch steps. "Go ahead," John replied, watching her face. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the freshly painted door. Turquoise blue, her favorite color. John had worked weekends for months with Thomas and volunteers from both communities to renovate the modest three-bedroom home. Today they would finally move in. "It's perfect," Sarah declared, reaching for the key hanging around John's neck. Inside, sunlight streamed through windows onto wooden floors. The living room featured built-in bookshelves already filled with Sarah's growing collection. Her bedroom had been painted yellow with a desk beneath the window for homework. John's wood carvings decorated the mantel, including the paired figures he'd given her after the adoption was finalized. "Come see the special part," John said, leading her through the kitchen to the backyard. There, beneath a large cottonwood tree, stood a small structure built in the traditional Apache style, a circular hogan with a dirt floor and eastern-facing entrance. "For ceremonies and teaching," John explained. "A place to honor the old ways." Sarah approached it reverently. Though officially adopted and legally Sarah running bear for 3 months now, she continued to navigate her dual identity with thoughtful questions and an open heart. "Will you teach me more songs there?" she asked. "Yes. And stories. Our history." Sarah nodded solemnly before breaking into a grin. "I need to show Mary and Grace." "When are they coming?" "The housewarming is Saturday," John reminded her. "Everyone will be here." As they unloaded boxes from the truck, a familiar county vehicle pulled up. Linda Winters stepped out, carrying a potted plant and manila folder. "Just dropping off a housewarming gift," she explained, "and your 6-month post-adoption report. Everything looks perfect." John invited her inside, watching with pride as Sarah gave Linda a tour, pointing out special features with proprietary enthusiasm. When they reached the kitchen, Linda handed John the folder. "This completes my official involvement in your case," she said, "though I hope you'll still invite me to Sarah's school events." "Always," John assured her. "You were there from the beginning." After Linda left, they continued unpacking. Sarah carefully arranged her treasures in her new room: the red hairbrush, her beaded bracelet, the small drum with 2 faces, and the photograph of baby Sarah with Jessica that now sat on her nightstand. Jessica had remained sober for 9 months now, working as a receptionist at her recovery center and taking classes at the community college. Her supervised visits had progressed to occasional weekend outings with Sarah. While their relationship would never be traditional, it had found its own careful balance. As afternoon faded toward evening, a truck pulled up outside. Sheriff Miller, off-duty in jeans and a flannel shirt, carried a wrapped package. "Housewarming," he explained gruffly, from the department. Inside the package was a handcrafted wooden sign reading "Running Bear Residence," with both the town and reservation emblems carved into opposite corners. "For the front porch," Miller suggested. "Figure you belong to both places now." After dinner, John and Sarah walked their property line as twilight descended. At the exact boundary between reservation and town land stood a large stone John had placed there, painted white on one half, with Apache symbols on the other. "Why do some stones have to mark where things end?" Sarah asked, touching the painted surface. "This one doesn't mark an ending," John corrected gently. "It marks where things come together." Sarah considered this, nodding with the seriousness she sometimes displayed. At 7, she still carried the old wisdom of a child who had seen too much, balanced now with the lightness of secure belonging. "Like us," she concluded. "Yes," John agreed, "like us." They stood together watching stars appear, the lights of town visible in one direction, the darker silhouette of the reservation in the other. Sarah slipped her hand into John's, a gesture that had become so natural neither noticed it anymore. The following morning, Sarah's school bus would stop at their driveway for the first time, a special arrangement that allowed her to attend both schools on alternating days. Today, she'd wear her Running Bear name proudly among her reservation classmates. Tomorrow, she'd carry the same name among the town children. As they walked back toward their new home, porchlight welcoming in the gathering darkness, John reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter beside a dumpster to this moment, a family created not by blood, but by choice, by persistence, and by love that transcended boundaries. Sarah ran ahead, impatient to arrange her books before bedtime. John watched her go. This child who had taught an entire community that family could be defined in new ways, that cultures could enrich rather than divide, that healing could happen in unexpected places. The wind carried the scent of sage from the hill. Somewhere an owl called into the night, a good sign in Apache tradition, a message from ancestors watching over their own. "Come on, Dad," Sarah called from the porch, using the title that still filled John's heart whenever he heard it. "We're home." And they were, not just in the new house that straddled two worlds, but in the family they had created together. A boundary stone marking, not division but the sacred place where separate paths converged, to form something new and unbreakable.